Hey everyone, Professor Leon here with our second week experimenting with plein air sculpture. Um, I worked with the Artists Guild of the Purple Isle again this week, and I worked again in the paper mache. And we went to a resort called Pine and Palms. I think I'm getting that right. Um, and I'm here, I'm going to give commentary again. And we'll just jump right into it. Let's see, here we go. And this is Pine and Palm. And this is a little, just a 360 of the resort itself. I want to start including that so you can kind of get a sense of some of these beautiful resorts that are in the Keys. I really like this one. You know, we don't really have beaches with waves that are naturally occurring, but most of the resorts do create their own version of it where you can swim and kayak. There was a fishing boat that went out while I was there last Tuesday. And yes, you can see they also have a pool right out on the water. So if you don't feel like swimming out into the ocean, you can instead enjoy the sun from the pool. All right, so this is me getting set up here. It's a little dark out here. Let me see. All right, so as I discussed at the end of last week, I had problems with my armature, which was the wire mesh being too bouncy because I had this crazy idea that I would curve it, and I'm going to say that that did not work because it was really irritating trying to deal with that bouncing and had to be really careful not to push the paper mache too far through it. So I did ahead of time. I laid down another mesh, so there is a wire mesh under this. You just can't see any of it because I put it totally flat, and I built a little frame around the edge to keep the paper mache in, but also to create a visual square or rectangle, actually, right? Um, when you're working with a loose organic kind of medium, visually speaking, you want to have some nice, clear, delineated spaces because it creates a really nice contrast. Uh, it can look too messy and unprofessional and amateurish if you don't have some clearly marked lines that say to the viewer, oh, the parts that are messy and overlapping, I meant to do that. See, I have clear edges here, so where it's loose, that's intentional. Now, of course, for every rule in art, there is an artist or an example of art that breaks it successfully. And I, right away, as soon as I say that, I have um, examples coming to mind like Klaus Oldenburg, an artist who melt the visual. Now, the whole time I was working on this, I kept thinking of Klaus Oldenburg, and I'll put some links uh, in the description to his sculptures where he has a series of sculptures where things are everyday objects, but they look like they're melting. Um, and in part because I still don't have my paper mache recipe where I need it, it was kind of like trying to sculpt with frosting this whole day, and everything kept melting. And the end result, now I mean that metaphorically, not literally, paper mache doesn't actually melt, it's not wax. Ooh, but maybe I should work in wax. What an idea. Oh, I really like that idea. I love working in wax, and it would make so much sense in the heat in the sun. All right, but we'll save that for a little later. Um, So anyway, it's not literally melting, but because the paper mache is still too fluid, it was like I'm trying to get liquid to stand in place. And I kind of like that idea too. So there's just something about trying to wrangle in the chaos of this very loose medium that is appealing to me. But it's going to be a real difficult balance to strike, because at a certain point it becomes nothing, right? It's water. How do you sculpt with water? Um, yeah, that's a problem. That's a difficulty. But it's also part of what makes this experiment interesting to me. One of the exercises that artists do often is to kind of give themselves a difficulty. For example, last week, the Artist Guild of the Purple Islands um, did an after meeting exercise of drawing with your non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, you drew with your left hand. And it's a great exercise because it forces you to kind of get out of your automatic pilot thinking. You know what I mean? It's like when you draw with your dominant hand, you already know what's going to happen, and you tend to just go in there full force ahead and draw, because you already kind of know what's going to happen. You know how your hand reacts when you think something. The messages to your hand are already well developed. That firing, that neuron firing. I've got neurologists out there going, "That's not how this works." Whatever, you know what I mean. So you've already trained your eye-hand coordination for your dominant hand, but your non-dominant hand, it isn't trained, and it actually allows you to open up more creativity. So it's an exercise in expanding your creativity, which you can then bring back to your dominant hand and kind of back up a bit and think a little more openly about what you're doing, instead of going into automatic pilot where you just do what you think you should do, or make art without thinking, which is something that artists are perpetually struggling against. Okay, I just have a hard edit there. I was getting so much glare because I was trying to record this earlier in the day, and I couldn't see my screen at all. So I had to cut, and I am now returning. And so we will have a little overlap here. Um, as you can see, parts of the video that we've already seen are in here again. So I was talking about art and the meltiness of my material, but because I couldn't fully see what I was working on, I wasn't really narrating what was happening. So what I've been doing with my palette knife is, you see me putting my arm up every so often and holding, I don't have it with me, but holding my tool up, and I'm using the edge of my palette knife to line it up to the implied lines that I see in the landscape. I'm holding it up along the edge of the water on the horizon line. I'm holding it up on the edge of the sand on the shoreline, and I'm lining it up along the diagonal of those posts that are going out along the dock. It's very important when you do anything in linear perspective. That's what that's called, when things look uh, like they converge as they move away from us. Of course, we know that the dock isn't actually converging as it goes out. It's not getting smaller, but we have this optical illusion. And subconsciously, we are very unforgiving with those types of lines when we see them in an artwork. We're used to navigating actual physical space using those cues. So when they're wrong, we might not even consciously notice that that's what's wrong, uh, but we do notice, and we'll say, oh, something's not quite right with that artwork. Um, so an artist has to be aware of this and either get it right or alter it in a controlled manner. So I am laying in the angles of the pier, the dock, as it goes away from me, and then I am laying in the verticals of the posts that recede away from me. And this entire sculpture session, that was probably the most significant part, and I've put it in the center of my artwork, so it's intended as the focus of the piece. So a lot of attention gets paid to trying to get those lines correct. All right, so I've laid out my horizon line. I've laid out the linear perspective of the dock, of the pier, and I'm now building up some thickness with the upright posts. A little later in this video, I do give you a full view of the dock that I'm sculpting, so you can see my actual point of view. Right, so as I mentioned, I did thicken the paper mache. I took the batch I had already made and I added more joint compound to it. I'm still not happy with it, and I've decided that it is probably because it's a different joint compound. I couldn't lay hands on the joint compound I usually use, and it can make a difference. So I am going to go back and try a small batch once I lay my hands on the joint compound I usually use and see if that improves things and try to figure out what's going wrong. I don't think I'm going to work in paper mache next week. I need a break from working with frosting, and so I'm probably going to work in straight clay next week. And also, it occurs to me that while I might know what it means to make a sculpture out of clay, anyone viewing this may not. So, as a point of reference, I think it's a good idea for me to go and do just what I might call a straight sculpture, right, where I'm not experimenting. It's still kind of enough of an experiment just to do sculpture out plein air, because that isn't something that's done that frequently. I have done that at the zoo when I lived in Philadelphia. I would take my clay and a modeling stand to the zoo, and because there's a large uh, presence of art schools and artists in Philadelphia, it is a common practice for sculptors to go and work at the zoo from the animals, from life. So I've had a tradition of this, but it's still pretty rare. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to truck around. Um, so I think that will be interesting, just to bring my clay. I don't use water-based clay. I use an oil-based clay. So it's not gonna. The sun's actually gonna be helpful in softening the clay while I'm working. So usually when I work in the studio, back when I was in Pittsburgh, it was cold. So I had a heat lamp that I would put in a cooler with my clay to keep it warm and pliable. And then I would take it out and work with it. And then when it was in the studio, which was significantly cooler, if not cold, it would harden up, which was really nice, because then as you work, you're adding soft clay to hard clay, and that is desirable because it helps you to not lose your landmarks. Um, so what I mean by that is, like, I've laid down a landmark of a horizon line here. If that was disappearing because my paper mache foundation was too soft and it would just kind of melt in, that would be undesirable. because I would lose my landmark. The same is true now. I've built up this indication of where I want these the poles from the pier and the pier itself. So I've got some more landmarks. You'll notice that I'm trying my best to make a sharp edge there, even though the posts are actually round. I want them to pick up visually. And the way a relief communicates shapes and volume is through the creation of shadows. So I'm obviously not creating something three-dimensionally. So how do you know what it looks like? What happens is you create an angle in your clay, and the light comes across it and creates a shadow. The sharper your angle, the darker your shadow. So I want those front poles to really pop. So I want a nice strong shadow there. If I were to round that edge too much, it would start to look less dramatic. So there's always a push and pull between what you know about what you're looking at and creating the illusion of what you're looking at. It's not the same thing. It's not the same exercise. I'm not building a pier. I'm creating the illusion of a three-dimensional pier. And even though the relief is a three-dimensional object, the rules are different. It's kind of halfway between the rules of working in 2 dimensions and creating a full three-dimensional object. All of these things are things that I can't really explain totally just through words, which is part of why it's an art. You have to practice it, and you have to get a feel for it. And there are a lot of different ways to achieve your ends. Okay, now I took a little break. I'm not remembering why. It might have been lunchtime, probably. Or maybe, oh, right, I wanted to move it from the right side to the left side. So I was getting a little unhappy with my arm, my arm constantly blocking the view. So I did pause to move the camera to my other side. So now I'm going to block it with my hand full of paper mache. All right, you can see that so far I have built up, I've got a horizon line and I'm starting to build up that horizon. I've built a few of the upright poles. And you can also start to see, I'm going to try to point at it, but you can't see me pointing. You can also start to see there's a kind of a slumping at the bottom of the relief. So because I had laid the paper mache out horizontally the night before, it dried some, but it's really pretty thick, so it didn't dry completely. So it's still, especially the underneath layers, so there's like a surface that's kind of dry, and you saw when I dragged my palette knife through it, it kind of tore it a little bit. So the surface dried, but underneath did not. So the whole thing is kind of slumping down. And I decided I actually kind of like that because it's kind of looking like sand or looking like the land. And so I am not unhappy with that. And that is what I would call, in the words of the infamous Bob Ross, a happy accident. So it is something unintended that happened, but as always, what's in our artwork is a conscious decision. Even when it occurs by accident, I am making a conscious choice to leave it, and I've decided that I like that and might actually allow that to happen again. So I kind of like how how this medium is pushing back against me. Like I talked about earlier, I do not have complete control. I so do not have control over this paper mache, in part because it's so wet, and in part because it's paper mache. It's not an exacting medium like clay. Clay, I could sculpt little fingernails and eyelashes and little. At one point, I tried to put in. I don't think that's what I'm doing here. But at one point, I tried to put in the light tower, which I believe is alligator reef light tower. Um, don't have that kind of precision in paper mache, so I took it back out. All right, so I'm putting these in, and I am not happy with the ones on the right. I like the ones on the left, but the ones on the right, where they're kind of going up, down, up, and they, as I mentioned earlier, uh, the eye is very unforgiving if the linear perspective is wrong. And the linear perspective on those on the right is wrong. And I think that's probably why I'm sitting there looking at them like, what am I going to do with those? I don't know what I'm going to do with those. Am I going to keep tickling them even though they're wrong? At this point, I'm frosting a cake that is not baked. I can make them prettier, but they're wrong. I can see myself thinking. I'm trying to make the background, what represents the sky, a different texture than what I've represented the water or the poles or the clouds. So that's why I'm just really smoothing out that background. And now I'm back futzing with the poles. Oh, so much futzing. Well, while I'm futzing with the poles, one of the things that occurred to me, you saw the opening sequence was footage not of Alligator Lighthouse, but of the Careysport Reef Lighthouse. I was out with Coral Restoration Foundation this week, and we were out at the Careysport Nursery, and it was delightful. Um, but I have a new 5 mil wetsuit. It's super floaty. So I could not dive with it, and I had to wear my other one. And it just reminded me of one of the, not the first rule of diving, but it is, I would say, a rule of diving, is you introduce one new thing at a time. One new thing, not 5 new things. So if you have a new regulator and a new mask and a new wetsuit and you're going to dive a wreck for the first time, no, too many variables. One new thing. And it occurred to me that when I got this wild hair to do this experiment, I was trying to do too many new things all at once. So I've got a new paper mache recipe. Well, it's an old paper mache recipe, but it's new for here. So I'm making paper mache. I'm doing a mural plein air. Um, There just was too many variables, and I think I broke one of my own rules. Uh, it's not as important in art because nobody's going to die, but it's a good rule for a reason. So introduce one thing at a time, and that's also part of my decision to do a straight clay mural next week or relief sculpture next week, uh, to kind of scale it back. Let's go backwards here. Oh, am I taking it out? No, I'm still futzing with those things. So let's take a step back and think about how I can do sculpture in a more familiar medium, plein air, before I introduce an unconventional medium like paper mache. So I'll be working in clay next week. Although earlier I had my idea of working in wax, and now I want to do that. But nope. We're going to work in clay. All right. Oh, I'm driving myself crazy watching this. They have to go. Marie, they have to go. Sometimes you just have to try to make them look as best as they possibly can before you realize they're not right. This always pains students immensely when they've spent, like they're doing a portrait and they've spent all this time making this beautiful eye. And I come around and say, well, yeah, but it's in the wrong place on the head. You're going to have to move it. And they go, but it's so beautiful. Like, yeah, but it's in the wrong place. You want to pull a Picasso and leave it there? That's fine. But then you need to really lean into that and own that it's in the wrong place, like a flounder in the wrong place. Okay. Yep, trying yet another tactic not to remove those posts. Trying to put in another post. Maybe that'll make the post look better. Now it just looks like teeth that need braces. You can see the light and dark patterns, though. That's what I'm going for. That's how you will read this as a series of posts. You need to create that light and dark. I'm stubborn, man. It looks worse. Alright, well, I'm taking the last one out. I'm like, well, that didn't make it look better. I'm trying to figure out how I can get in there surgically. Has she figured it out? I'm looking again at where the line actually is. I'm drawing it back in because I'm realizing that the lines are just wrong. The implied lines of those posts are wrong. So I'm going to ignore it a little bit, build up my horizon line. And when I lean back, I'm looking to see the whole thing because it's really easy to get focused on that one little pole or that one little thing you're doing and not see it in the entire context. So I am leaning back and looking at the whole artwork. When I'm also leaning back, I'm looking at the view of what I'm working on, what I'm looking at, and I'm looking at the lights and darks. Oh, look at that. I'm doing it. Yay! Finally! I'm taking out the middle one. Okay, I haven't committed to taking them totally out. Taking out the middle one. Like maybe that'll make it better. This was so many days ago that I have forgotten. I don't know when I commit. And I think maybe I do leave the first one. Oh, oh, there it goes. Out. Out with you. Out. So now I'm going to get a little more aggressive here, and I realize this is just, I'm fighting against. It's sometimes easier to tear the whole house down instead of trying to repair it or remodel it. So I'm just tearing the house down. I'm going to leave the one. I think I leave that one. And everything keeps slumping down too while I'm working. So I'm trying to work with that instead of against it. Right, I'm going back to basics, back to the line that is the edge of the pier and where the um, verticals sit. Okay, I've made the bold move of taking those poles out. I think I do go take lunch now, just to kind of like clear my head and start fresh. Yeah, there's often a struggle. There's a struggle against trying to put what you see into this format, struggle against the medium itself. You know, and when you dream it up in your head, oh, it's going to be so beautiful. Nothing ever looks as beautiful as the actual site. And part of that is, you know, there's this whole 360 around me that I'm experiencing, while I'm there are pelicans flying in and diving for fish. There are people in silhouette out on the pier fishing. The sun is beaming down through the clouds. And there's just so much beauty uh, in so many different senses. It's always a little frustrating. Okay, I've come back with renewed vigor. I am cutting things out. So I am starting with the most important post, which is the one closest to the viewer, and I am making sure that is in the right place and is the right thickness because it just got too big and gloppy. So I'm cutting it down, cutting it down. I'm going to take myself out of the view for a little bit and let this run.
Getting ready? Pardon me? I said you getting ready for your big trip? Getting ready to head out, brother. All right, man. All right. Send a postcard back to all the poor people back there, you know?
Okay, you can see I'm laying those in a little more carefully this time, making sure they're smaller because they're so far away. And when they're smaller and so far away, you can't put as much detail in. Students do that a lot. They try to, because you're looking and you're focused when you're making art, you're sometimes putting details in that you can't actually see. So there's a tendency to try to transcribe what I know from looking at the one that's closest to me to the one that's furthest away from me. And the truth is, I can't actually see that. The one that's further away visually has less details. So when I'm trying to create a visual reality, recreate what I see, you don't want to put that information in there. And again, there are examples where artists have broken that rule. Right? We're back at Picasso, Cézanne, a lot of the Impressionists, post-Impressionists break that rule. But you have to be aware of the rule before you can break it intelligently, successfully. So I think those are starting to look better. So I'm keeping them smaller. I've got the bottom implied diagonal correct now. So now I'm starting to get an illusion of depth, which is what I'm after. Alright, now I want to make the pier look like it's coming more out at us. I'm going to start to build that up a little bit more, I think, now. And I want the space between those posts to be clearly delineated. It was a bit of an optical illusion. When I looked more closely, I saw that the tops of them right? The tops of them were actually all lined up on a horizontal, like they made a straight line uh, very close to the horizon line. And I think that was part of what was vexing me is I thought, that they should, I had an idea that they should converge as they moved further away from me. But in reality, because the tops of them is right at my eye level, they formed their own straight horizontal line that was parallel, not almost parallel, not quite, but almost parallel with the horizon line itself. So that my brain was getting in the way of me seeing what was actually there. And that happens a lot. Uh, you think you know what you see, but you don't actually see that. One of the things of working at a resort is you have to be a good guest, and the resorts allow us in to work in part because people are curious about what we're doing. And it's kind of fun to come across a bunch of artists doing landscape painting. Uh, so when somebody comes by, you saw that, you might have seen the person in the frame, they come by and they have some questions and they want to know about the work. Um, it behooves me to be gracious and explain what I'm doing a little bit. Um, I try not to stop working completely, that breaks my flow, and it would encourage them to stay. And I want to be polite, and I am happy to share some information, but I need to stay in my flow. Um, so maybe I'm saying this so if you see an artist out working, you know, yes, say hello. Maybe they'll have a card you can take. And I did tell people that they could find this video and that I would eventually publish the finished the finished work. At one point in my life, I did work as a professional sculptor, so I do think of, um, I do think about work in terms of product, but that really hasn't ever been the main focus for my work, in part because you can always make it cheaper with a mold somewhere in Taiwan than making it handmade. So my work needs to be focused on something other than being a decorative product. And that is true for anyone that's making handmade, one-of-a-kind things. Um, you're always going to get underbid by something that's mass-produced if it's merely for decorative purposes. So you have to lean in to the other reasons that you feel compelled to make artwork, because product ain't it. For me, it's always been sharing with people that, yeah, you can make this too. Right. I'm almost a little embarrassed at how much I keep working with those poles, but the ones on the left, I laid them out and left them. I was happy with them, but the ones on the right, I like them a lot more now. Still not quite right, and that's probably because that one that's closest to us is too short, because I'm still fighting the idea that they are horizontal across the top. I want them to be at an angle for my conception of the piece, but they aren't, and they don't look right, and I'm going to have to give in to visual reality if I want this to read as a dimensional space. I just keep moving it up a little more, a little more, a little more. Okay, I'm going to take my picture out of here again so I'm not blocking. Although my arm is blocking. Alright. That's good. And I am rounding that first one off a little bit. And I'm also making it a little bigger towards the bottom. And so that is an alteration. That's an intentional alteration to kind of exaggerate the foreshortening of the post. Like I'm making it look like it's leaning back away from me a little bit. Which it isn't, but I kind of like that drama. I like that you can see the rays of sun in this video. Now I'm thinking of, I think it was Bernini that included sun bolts in one of his sculptural installations that were made out of brass, I think. I'll put a link to that too. So interesting links this week. We'll have Klaus Oldenburg and Bernini's, I think it's the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. Could have that wrong, but I'll fix it in the comments. Narrowing that post a little bit, making the space between them a little more clearly delineated. Realizing I want those bottom posts to come towards the viewer a little bit more. Oh, I'm giving in and making them taller. Good. Yeah, not a lot of precision is allowed in this medium. I'm okay with that. I'm not a real precision-oriented artist in any medium. But this is pushing even my limits. You know, I put the David White poem or reading. It was a Rilke poem he was reading and talking about. I put that in the channel. It was speaking to me very much in regards to this project. There's a phrase he used in there. He said that in some life experiences you can only get to crawling on your hands and knees. I think that way about art often. You really have to humble yourself, and it's always a failure before it's any sort of success. And his idea that you think you're going to cross the finish line like an Olympic runner winning, but no, it's with a whimper. So many things in life are that way. I feel like I can see the depth there, and I noticed that the horizon line behind at the end of the pier didn't perfectly line up with the horizon line on either side of it, and I'm okay with that. I think it made the horizon line at the end of the pier a little more dramatic, and I really wanted that to be the focal point, not just the background. There's something very dramatic about that pier into the great blue. I have to at some point get a better easel too, so that we don't have the chair blocking both the view and the bottom of the sculpture. Moving up that horizon line. I think I'm moving it up a little higher so that it will be in line, a little closer in line with the one that's between the verticals. And obviously, in the distance, there's not a ledge there, right? The water's not a ledge. But that's how I create the shadow and the highlight, which will read as that strong horizon line. I need to fix the way it's kind of lopping over at the edge there. Right, it's falling off the edge of the earth. Those little divots, those little teeny divots of wrong make such a huge difference. Like, look at how little material I'm putting on my palette knife there. Just enough to build up that edge of the horizon line. It's enough to create a sharper angle so that it reads as light and dark. A little more dramatic. Curve at the edge is driving me crazy. Fix it, Marie. You know, every time before I change something, I always ask myself, if I think something's wrong, I ask myself if it might be a happy accident. Well, it's wrong. Do you like it that way? I didn't intend to do it. Do you like it that way? Does it add something to the artwork or not? The slumping there, you can see it really strongly now at the bottom. I like that slumping. It's kind of piling over the edge. And I think that's going to look really nice once I take it out of the frame.
What's up, man? Hey, how you doing? Dave? Yep. All right, I did meet you. Yeah, I was just talking Ralph. Now I put the pieces together, man. Yeah. Remind me your name one more time. Tim. Tim. I was going to say, I'm right here. In the North Point right there. Nice. Yeah. Are you just here for the club? No, I'm for the year round. Sweet. I've been, yeah, for 2 years. Yeah, 3 years, but last year I said I upgraded and I said, this is a no-brainer. Yeah. Oh, this is cool. And you guys were up there, right? And he told me his story that he was going to sell it. He was so stuff. Yeah. And you called and said, I found something great. Yeah. I was like, hey, kind of daylight dollar short, but they want to check it out. Oh, I said, dude, he told you that a week later. He's like, yeah. So, that's great.
So now I'm
getting a refill. Yeah, man, I'll see you down there,
Now I'm correcting, refining, actually, making sure that the edge of the pier is not lost. I'm building it up so it really feels like it's coming towards the viewer. Unfortunately, the chair is partially in the way. But I'll show you from straight on at the end so you can see the whole thing. Towards the end, I spend more time looking and less time working because I'm listening to what it tells me it needs. I know that sounds really woo-woo, but that's how it is. didn't talk about putting the clouds in. I'm not sure when I missed that part of the video, but because of the slumping, there was a big gap across the top that I did fill in. And when I filled it in, I just left it rough, and I think it reads nicely as clouds. So I was happy with it, and I don't think I futzed with it much after that. So I'm making some final decisions here. Deciding I want a little more of a point on that first post. Zip my tent so the bugs don't come in. I have a feeling that that's about it. I'm not liking how that right edge kind of droops over. Oh, this is me trying to put in the lighthouse. And quickly realizing that I do not have the detail or the precision available to me in this medium to make that look like anything. So, I'm going to try again. I'm going to keep trying. No. Out it goes. Nope. We tried it. Out it goes. Okay. Trying to decide if those clouds need any more love. I think I decide I like them how they are. Giving everything a last pass. It looks like I'm going to call it. I'm still, at least from this point of view, I don't like the way the right side horizon line drops down. But we'll see what it looks like when it's straight on. And now I'm going to have to go look at it in the light of day and see what it looks like. And I need to buy some new gloves because those are my gloves for installing coral, and I can't get the paper mache off them, so they're a little too expensive to be one use. Okay, so you can kind of see the poles going back. Well, maybe I don't hate the right edge so much. We'll see. That might need a little love. I can still rework the paper mache after it's dry with either a Dremel or sandpaper, but it is hard to do. So that gives you the view that I'm looking at. And I think that is all she wrote. All right. Thank you, everybody. Let's see. All right. So I'm leaving you with one of the pictures I took of the pier that I enjoyed so much. And next week, again, I will be working in clay. And I will also make follow-up videos of my work completing and finishing and perhaps coloring the 2 paper mache experiments I've done so far. All right, see you then. Bye.